All right, so in our last process costing video, we were looking at the basics and a little bit of an overview of process costing. In this video, we're going to work through an example and do a process cost report. So if you have a chance, I recommend downloading the lecture notes and we'll get started. All right, so there are 5 steps to process costing. So the production cost report, all the steps are usually on one schedule. So the top half of the report is going to focus on steps 1 and 2. And we're going to be looking at the units. So this is how many units are we making? So in the previous video, we talked about butter. How many pounds of butter? So in this example, pounds will be our units. So we're going to look at how many pounds of butter do we have in beginning work in process? How many pounds of butter did we start process on? How many pounds of butter did we transfer out to our next department? How many pounds of butter did we have left at ending work in process? So the top part of the report will be focusing on units. And the bottom part of the report is going to focus on cost. How much cost were associated with that beginning work in process amount? How much cost were associated with the pounds that we started production during this time period? How much cost are associated with the amount of with the pounds that we transferred out to the next department? And how much cost are associated with the pounds that we have currently left in ending work in process inventory? And this is where we're going to see that equivalent units that we looked at last time come into play. So here's an example of the production cost report. This is the top part of it. So remember, there's 2 parts, and the top part of it is going to focus on those units. So we see here we have units to account for. How much was in our beginning work in process? How much do we start in production? These will be our total units to account for. So after we figure out how many total units we need to account for, then we're going to account for them. And that's where the bottom part, where we look at units accounted for, what was completed and transferred out? What did we finish? What's going to the next department? Then we'll look at what do we still have? What's still here in ending work in process? Right, and that will give us the total units accounted for. Now, this number here, the total units that we have to account for, and then the total units that we did account for, those should equal. So if this number up here is 1 million, so should this number be 1 million? Right. Now that we know how many units we have to account for, we're going to look at the flow of cost. Okay. So we see here now, all of this here is going to be dollar signs, right? So this whole thing are dollars. This first part here, oops. Okay, this first part here, these are not dollars, these are units. Okay, no dollars here. But over here, this is dollars. Now we're going to look at the costs and account for those. So we're going to see of that beginning work in process units, how much did it cost? What kind of cost did we add into the period? This will give us the total cost to account for. Once we figure out how many costs we need to account for, then we have to figure out where they went. How much did we transfer out and transfer with our product to the next process? How much of these costs are related to our ending work in process inventory that are still with this department, still with this process? So first, how many costs do we need to account for? And then we're going to account for them. Notice here that we have our total, and then we have a column here for direct materials and conversion. Remember that our conversion costs are going to be our direct labor plus our manufacturing overhead. All right, let's go through a practical example. So back to our Land O'Lakes butter example. We have 2 departments, the churning and the forming, and we are currently working on the churning department. So the information they're giving us here is that we have 100,000 units in beginning work in process inventory. We started during the month 1,500,000 units, and it tells us here that all of our direct materials, all the cream and the salt, are added at the beginning of the process. Then we have units in ending work in process, and these will be 200,000 units. So 200,000 units are in the process of being churned. And we know that a unit is equal to a pound. So there's 200,000 pounds of butter still being churned at the end of this period, at the end of January. Okay. And of those 200,000 pounds still being churned, they are 40% of the way through the process. So they're not done yet, they're still in process. So if we think about how this works and visualize this process here, at the beginning of January, we have January 1st, and we have January 31st, right? Every time we start a new materials, so we start here, let's say, we are going to add 100% of the direct materials. Let's say we start a new batch here. We're going to add 100% of the direct materials. If we add a new batch here, we're going to add 100% of the direct materials. Now let's just say that as we go through here and then we transfer out. So now we start a new batch. We go through here, we transfer out. Now we go through here, end of period. But we aren't going to transfer out. This is where we see that our conversion cost, we see that it's only 40% complete. 100% complete on our direct materials because we added all the cream and salt right here. There's no more cream and salt to be added during this process, but we haven't finished churning it yet. We still need more electricity. We still need more direct labor. It's still in the factory. It's still taking up shared resources for our manufacturing overhead. So we see that it's only 40% done. So this is where we looked at in the previous video of having two different equivalent units for our direct materials and our conversion cost. If our direct materials here is 100% complete, then the equivalent units would be 100%. Here we see that there's 40%. And if you remember our formula for equivalent units of ending work in process, it would be however many units you have times the percentage of completion. Right? So in this example, it would be the 200,000 units that we have times the 40% completion that we have, which would give us 80,000 equivalent units. Right. Now, that's our unit information. Now it's giving us some financial information. So we're looking here, we see that our beginning work in process on January 1st, we have direct materials of 110,000 and we have conversion costs of 24,000. Right? So our total work in process balance beginning is 134,000. Now we're going to see, so we have what we had at beginning. What did we incur? So if we think about this as a T account, so this is our work in process churning. Right? Our beginning work in process is 134,000. Right? And 110 of that again represents direct materials and 24,000 represent our conversion cost. Then we're going to add addition 1,730,000 of direct materials. We're going to add 10,000 of direct labor. We're going to add 558,000 of manufacturing overhead. Okay. Remember here, we got our direct materials and we would add these together and this would be 568,000 later, and this would be considered our conversion cost. Right. So this is materials that we're adding to the process. All right. So where do we get some of this information from? So the direct materials used, we're still going to have a materials requisition. We're still going to request the materials from our raw materials inventory, right? So the source is coming from raw materials still, right? So we're still going to send in a request for it. Direct labor, well, we'll still have that factory labor account. We're still going to be applying labor to it, right? And then manufacturing overhead, I assume we're going to be using pounds, right? Or turning hours, or we'll use some sort of activity base, same as we did with job costing and process costing. We still have our activity base. All right, so let's do a production cost report for our churning department. And you should have, if you downloaded the lecture notes, you should be able to follow along. All right, so remember that a process cost report has, or sorry, a production cost report had two different sections. The first section, we're going to keep track of our units. So looking here at our units, we're going to say what was beginning, work in process, what did we start, and or the total units that we need to account for. So if you take a look at your lecture note, you're going to see those written down for you. Okay, so remember it said that we had 100,000 units in beginning, work in process, and we started in production 1,500 units. Okay, so notice there's no dollar signs here because right now we're just keeping track of units. So if I had 100,000 and then I started 1,500,000 units, then how many I have to account for is 1,600,000. I need to figure out where did those units go? Are they still here? Are they part of my ending work in process? Or did I transfer those over to the next department? So now I'm going to look at my units to be accounted for. So remember, total units to account for and total units accounted for must equal. So I know that this number is going to be 1,600,000, right? They're going to equal. Right? So then it tells me on my notes here, let's see here, where does it tell us? Oh, that our units in ending work in process inventory are 200,000. So I'm going to put my 200,000 because I know this. It did not tell me how many units were completed and transferred out. But even though it didn't tell me that bit of information, I can still figure that out because I know what my ending should be, the 1,600,000, because these have to balance here. I know that I have 200,000 units in my ending work in process inventory. So this, I must have, to make the math balance, I must have transferred out 1,400,000 units. All right, so now that I have my totals and that my totals equal, now I'm going to start looking at these equivalent units. So if I've transferred it out, right? So on these whole units to account for, we don't have any equivalent units. That's why it's grayed out here. These are just how many units do we have in general. Okay, now I'm going to look at my equivalent units. So I'm going to take a look. The 1,400,000 units I transferred out, I won't transfer them unless they are 100% complete. I'm not going to transfer half finished product. So anything that's been moved out of my department, I know is 100% completed. So I can multiply 1,400,000 by 100%. Okay. And I know that the direct materials and the conversion cost, it's going to be 100%. But my ending work in process inventory, this is still here. And if it's still here, it's not done. So if you recall back to the information given to us, this is where we're going to look at two different equivalent unit and percentage of completions. So in the churning department, the cream and the salt is always added at the beginning of the process. So as soon as we start, we have added 100% of the materials. So we know that the equivalent unit amount for direct materials will be 100%. So I'm going to put here 200,000. Okay, because that is 100%. All the milk, sorry, all the cream, all the salt, it's there. But the conversion, that combination of that direct labor and that manufacturing overhead, that is only 40% complete. So remember, we had taken that 200,000, those ending units. So I've got 200,000 pounds of butter churning, but it is only 40% complete. So if I convert those churning pounds of butter into the equivalent units, right? So I'm basically combining the pizzas to see how many wholes do I have. I have 80,000. Okay. So if I add these together, my direct materials equivalent unit is 1,600,000, okay, 100% complete. And my total units accounted for here, that is going to be 1,480,000. All right, so this is steps 1 and 2, where we are looking at the total units we are to account for, and we're working on our equivalent units. So at this point, no money, just units. Now, the second part of a production cost report is we're going to look at the money. We're going to figure out how much money is associated with these 1.4 million pounds, units that transferred to our farming department, and how much money in that work in process account is still here, still in that 200,000 pounds of butter that's churning. So if I go back to my work in process, I'm going to take a look at this and see how much of this is still here. If so, that'll be my ending work, or was it transferred out? And if it was transferred out, then it would have gone into work in process forming. All right, so we'll come back to this slide here in a moment. All right, now let's look at the flow of cost. So we need to look at what was the total cost we have to account for. So go back and look at your lecture guides to show you the numbers, because I don't want to keep going back a few slides here. And it shows us that the direct materials cost that we had at the very beginning was 110,000. And we had 24,000 of conversion costs, which gave us a total of 134,000 work in process. Then we added 2,298,000 costs during the period. Of the costs that we added, 1,730,000 was direct materials, that cream and that salt. And 568,000 was the direct labor and the conversion cost, direct labor and the manufacturing overhead, so our conversion cost. All right, so I'm going to add these together. So I have a total of 2,432,000 to account for. 1,840,000 of that is direct materials, and 592,000 of that is conversion cost. And this is money. Okay, so these are not units, these is the money associated with the units above. Okay. Now we're going to figure out what is the cost per equivalent unit. Okay, so we know that we have 1,840,000 with our direct materials, but let's look back at our units. We have 1,600,000 total units to be accounted for here. Right. So I want to know, what is my cost per unit? And to figure that out, I'm going to take 1,840,000 divided by the 1,600,000, and I'm going to have $1.15. Okay, so for each unit, which is my pound of butter, the direct materials cost $1.15. Now let's look at our conversion costs. So I know over here on my conversion equivalent units, my completed and transferred out was 1.4 million. And my ending work in process equivalent whole units, I cannot use the whole 200,000 pounds. I have to convert that over into equivalent units, which is 80,000. So I'm going to take the 1,480,000. And when I divide that, I see that it cost 40 cents per equivalent unit of conversion cost. Now that I have that, those numbers, I can now allocate how much of the total work in process cost was transferred to the next process, the next department, and how much has stayed here. So I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to look at my cost to be accounted for. So I know that completed and transferred out. Okay, I'm going to look at the direct materials. Okay, so I'm going to take my $1.15, and now I'm going to multiply that by my units. So I see here my units to be accounted for, completed and transferred out, was 1,400,000 times $1.15. Okay, gives me 1,610,000. Right? So we're looking at those units. So how many units did we transfer out? 1.4. Okay, so I'm going to say up here, right? Remember, we transferred these to the next department. Okay, so those 1.4 million units we transferred, $1.15 of those per pound for the cream and the salt. Now we have 40 cents per pound for the direct labor and the manufacturing overhead. So 40 cents for our conversion cost. So I'm going to take 1.4 and I'm going to multiply that by the 40 cents. And when I do that, I have 560,000. When I add these two together, the 1,610,000 plus the 560,000, I have 2,170,000. So the cost, as you know, remember we have a total of 2,432,000 that we have to account for. Of that amount, we know that 2,170,000 was transferred out of our department and into the next one. Okay, so now let's take a look at our ending work in process. We have 200,000 pounds of butter that is currently churning. So how much of that 2,432,000 is associated with the 200,000 pounds that we still have left? So we're going to go back, take a look at our equivalent units. So on our ending work in process, what we still have left, remember that since we put the cream and the salt in at the very beginning, that's 100% complete. So we have 200,000 equivalent units for the direct materials. So I'm going to take 200,000 times $1.15, and that's going to give me 230,000. Now I'm going to associate how much conversion cost do I have with my ending work in process. Well, I'm coming back here, and this is where I had to use my equivalent units. And I only have 80,000 equivalent units. So I'm going to take 80,000 times my 40 cents, and I'm going to have 32,000. Okay. When I add 32,000 plus my 230, I have 262,000. If I add my 262 plus my 2,170,000, I have 2,432,000. And that's good because remember, these have to equal each other. Okay. If I add this, I have 1,840,000 and I have 592,000. So let's go back to those T accounts. Of the 2,432,000 that I have, okay, total cost, I'm going to transfer out how much? I'm going to transfer out 2,170,000. Okay, so here's my 2,170,000. Those are completed and transferred out, and I'm going to move it over to my work in process forming. Okay, so I'm taking it out of work in process churning, moving it to work in process forming. And then once I do my T account and I add up everything on my debit entries, my beginning work in process plus everything I added, look to see what I transferred out, I am going to have a debit balance of 262,000. And that 262,000 will be the cost associated with the 200,000 pounds of butter that I currently still have. All right, so that was a quick overview of a production cost report that we use during process costing. And we'll continue on in our next series of videos.